It's great to be joined today by Daniel Clark, who is a director, editor, cinematographer, and sound designer. Today, we're going to talk about his featured documentary, Behind the Curve, which follows people whose lives have been completely consumed by flat Earth theories or hypotheses. The idea that the Earth is actually flat and that there's a worldwide conspiracy to cover it up. Daniel, thanks so much for joining me and talking to me about this.
Thank you for having me.
So how did flat Earth stuff first get on your radar?
It first jumped on our radar as a production team because one of our producers, Nick Andert, he's a Reddit guy, and he saw a lot of people talking about it. And like most people, he thought it might have been a troll or people just messing around, a joke. But the more we looked into it, the more we realized, no, it's an actual community of people, and there are a lot of people who really firmly believe this, and it's not a joke. And we're documentarians, so we decided let's look into it even further and see if maybe there's a documentary to be made about this subject. And yeah, that's where it all started.
So as you get into this and start talking to people who have these beliefs, what's your sense of how people get pulled into the flat Earth ideology? And then we'll talk about how there's kind of two sides to it, two different ways in which it manifests. But generally speaking, like how does someone get sucked into this?
I think in order to believe flat Earth theory, flat Earth conspiracy, you need to believe in you need to be basically susceptible to conspiracy thinking. And that's not to say you're not smart, and that's not to say you're not educated. It's just saying like you're willing to believe that people can conspire together in large numbers to do something bad or withhold something from everybody else. And so a lot of people get into it through like 9/11 truthers. Moon landing is a big one, especially for flat Earth. But there's just tons of other conspiracies, and flat Earth is kind of at the end of the spectrum, I would say.
Okay, so
It's
so I
because
mean, when
once
you say
you
it, so is it common that flat Earth is not the only conspiracy theory that the people you talk to believe?
absolutely, most people believe in, if you can believe that there's a worldwide government conspiracy to cover up the fact of the shape of our Earth, then you can pretty much be open to believing any other conspiracy that's out there, because those seem like peanuts compared to flat Earth.
What is the claim, or maybe there's more than one, and that's totally fine, that the flat earthers assert for why anyone would want to cover up the true shape of the Earth?
Oh goodness. Well, I would say that a lot of flat earthers claim that people didn't know the shape of the Earth until the 50s, until the space program launched rockets up and then realized the shape of the Earth. And from that point on, they immediately got together, the worldwide governments got together to hide it from everybody else because it would mean that they were wrong. And admitting that kind of wrong in this paradigm shift would uh, lessen the government's power over the people. So hiding it from us seemed in the flat Earth conspiracy ideal, hiding the shape of the Earth keeps power in the governments and the powers that be.
So it's not that a flat Earth versus a spherical Earth is necessary for some other thing. It's simply the idea that because governments said that the Earth is spherical for a while, admitting that they're wrong would diminish their power in some kind of general way.
That's true, but also I think it would admit that there's some sort of creator. So if the Earth is a globe and we're in space and the Big Bang and all that, there's not a real strong, like there can be a big argument for atheism. However, if we're in a domed, flat creation, then there is 100% a creator. And I think some flat earthers approach it from a religious angle, which means that there is a creator, and the firmament is referenced in the Bible, and there's a lot of flat Earth talk in the Bible, and so it would kind of prove that there is a God if the Earth is flat, in a way.
This is so interesting to me because we've talked a lot about the anti-vaccine movement on the program. And one of the
Mhm.
interesting things about the anti-vaccine movement is that it has an enclave that exists on the political right and an enclave that exists on the political left, which have kind of come together. So on the right, anti-vaccine sentiment is often catalyzed by a skepticism of the government as an advocate for vaccination. On the left, it tends to be more related to skepticism of big pharma, and they have kind of come together and sort of unlikely allies ending up on the same page. Is there a similar dynamic, and it sounds like you're saying there is, with the flat Earth stuff, where there is the religious sort of side, and then there's the kind of skeptical of government or science side?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true. There is a religious component to a lot of people's belief in flat Earth, but there are people who I wouldn't call atheists because I don't think you can be if you're a flat earther, but they do seem to come at it from a very secular point of view.
Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned the dome, the idea of the Earth is flat within a dome. There's two
Mhm.
primary flat Earth models. There's the dome and then there's the infinite plane. Can you talk a little bit about them and whether this is like a controversial thing within the flat Earth community?
Sure, I'll try to be brief. So the dome model, both models essentially, for the most part, um, begin with the North Pole being in the center, and instead of Antarctica being at the bottom of a globe, it's actually on the perimeter of this circle. So it's the North Pole in the center and the South Pole on the outside.
Mm.
And that is enclosed by a dome, and the dome is some sort of display system. There's another belief that there's no proof of a dome, so therefore it's possible that Antarctica is just the start of this infinite plane that could go on, and there could be other domed planets or other flatter Earths, so to speak, outside of our own. And there is a bit of a divide in the community. I wouldn't say it's necessarily 50-50, but there is some sort of divide on we don't know what's out there, so we can't say anything for sure. And yeah, it's the dome I would say is the most popular model, so to speak.
So, in talking to people for the documentary, did you experience that there is, or let me frame it a different way. What is the feeling of those within the flat Earth conspiracy community about those who aren't believers? Is it that they simply have not um, uh, decided that the evidence that they put forward is compelling yet? Are they seen as more sort of hostile enemies that need to be dealt with? What's the perspective?
No, I would say, I mean, most all the flat earthers just started, becoming flat earthers within the past year to 3 years. So there's not a lot of animosity. A lot of the questions I got was, "You've seen all this evidence. How are you not a flat earther yet?" So they're it's kind of like I would say they're more interested in showing you the evidence that led them to their belief. So it's more of a welcoming community. It's there's no with the exception of scientists and people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, there's not really like an us versus them enemy situation.
Is there a sort of like a danger that you have identified within the flat Earth community associated with the belief, in the sense that, for example, if you believe the science on vaccines, you understand that not vaccinating actually presents a very specific health risk, both to the people not being vaccinated, to people around them who can't be vaccinated, herd immunity, all of these concepts. So there's like a very specific health risk we can associate. Is there anything that you've identified that is similar with believing in flat Earth conspiracies, or is it relatively benign?
I would say for the most part, it's not a harmful conspiracy to believe in. However, if you live your life without any trust in any kind of source, in any kind of government agency, in any kind of authority figure, then where do you start trusting? And how can you be uh, able to be a member of society? And if you're raising family, like what does that mean for your children and their belief in any kind of authority figures? Because there's good science out there that we should be embracing, but a lot of flat earthers look at most scientists as having an agenda and having, it's kind of like the idea of anti-vaxxers and big pharma, like they're out there to make money, so we shouldn't trust them. And I think not having any faith in any kind of institution is really problematic for our existence and our success as a society and as a race of humans.
What do you think is the goal of the flat earthers? I mean, I know, so like the immediate goal would be get everybody to believe what they see as the truth, right? Which is that there's a flat earth. But imagine that they do that, right? Imagine that the flat earthers succeed and there becomes this a consensus arises that the earth is actually flat. Then what? Like, in other words, what would be the implications from a practical perspective, if there even are any? Or is it just for them about, we just want people to believe what we see as the truth?
Um, well, if there was a consensus, I think we'd start seeing expeditions to the edge. And I think that's what's interesting about humanity is if we know there's a dome and we know there's an edge, we're going to go touch it. We're going to go try to see what's past it because we're curious humans. Um, so I think it would kind of be, you know, the same as it is with space. We try to set up agencies and see what's out there.
So it's not that there's sort of a particular life-altering implication for day-to-day lives if we simply recognize that the Earth is flat as they see it.
Well, I would say then the trust of government is going to collapse, and any kind of authority in NASA and any kind of scientist is going to completely be gone. So we'll have to start building that from scratch. Um, Trusting on, like, if, for instance, it was discovered that the Earth is flat, then that would everybody would be wrong up to this point, except for the flat earthers. So who do we trust anymore?
One thing I've been thinking about is if we think about the role of religion earlier in the sort of history of modern humans, there was likely some kind of like evolutionary advantage to being part of whatever religious group was in your immediate area. It probably increased cooperation, and in some way, it made it more likely that you would live long enough through that cooperation to pass on your genes to kids. So there's this kind of evolutionary advantage idea to religion at some point in the history of Homo sapiens. Do you get a sense that there's kind of like a similar community element and cooperation element for members of this particular conspiracy theory that might apply in a sort of pseudo-religious or dogmatic sense, and that maybe community that's lacking elsewhere is found in these beliefs?
Yeah, and I would say that's true of a lot of things on the internet, a lot of different beliefs and groups on the internet. And I think Flat Earth is just one of many. The conferences and the meetups that happened that we went to, very nice. Everybody was having a great time. It's not like a necessarily like a stale environment. Everybody's out there having, pizza and beer and just chatting up their conspiracy theories, and everybody's willing to listen, and it's a very open group. So if you're a flat earther and you go to one of these meetups, there is no deterrent to do it again and continue being part of this group because it's a welcoming, embracing community.
Outside of, okay, so I guess I have to couch this. You said it's not that common that the flat Earth conspiracy belief is the only conspiratorial belief for most flat earthers. But aside from
Mhm.
conspiratorial beliefs of this kind, do you find that generally speaking, the people you interacted with have relatively sort of well-adjusted views on other elements of humanity, like on economics, for example, or on medicine or whatever else? I mean, is it other than these conspiratorial beliefs? Are there other perceptions about the world around us relatively well-adjusted and accurate?
Uh, yeah, I would say for many of them, yes. But just like with any group, and it's not even specific to flat Earth, you're going to find people who don't want any part of any of that, kind of disconnecting from society. But I would say, generally speaking, yeah, I mean, they all have families, they get along well, they're very social. It's not like they're just these antisocial people who sit in a dark room all day. They're very out there. They've had jobs. They've done a lot of successful things. And yeah, I don't really see uh, I don't really see it as being an issue of not believing in anything and kind of being strange on all fronts. It's just maybe this one specific thing with a history of a little bit of skepticism towards the mainstream, what's out there in the mainstream.
What's your best assessment after diving into this so fully for the time that the film was in production? What's your sense of like the best way to deprogram or disabuse folks of this belief? And we could apply this to any conspiracy theory, but since you've been dealing with flat Earth, what would you say would be the best or most likely path for people to exit these beliefs?
I think you can't. It's like with any strong belief, and this is true of anti-vax and climate change and all that stuff. You can't just present facts
Right.
and then walk away thinking that it's going to change their mind. So the best you can really do, and this is from talking to a lot of people about this, is be kind, be willing to accept these people back into society. If they decide the Earth isn't flat, you can't chastise them for what they believe before you have to embrace that.
Mm.
Okay, you have a place now if you want. Um, Yeah, it just being open to listening and talking to them and not shoving them away and not being mean and not insulting them, because that's not going to, would that help you come back from any belief you held? I don't think so. Just being shamed or being berated is not going to make you say, oh, yeah, sure, let me change my entire view. Or should I just stay with people who like me and embrace me
Yeah,
and this
that's
belief?
interesting. I recently read John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed on the Internet. And one of the things he talks about is that once you're sort of irredeemable as far as popular society is concerned, that's actually more likely to be damaging in the long term. And that it's important that one, in many cases, although not all, not be sort of tagged with this irredeemability. And it seems that that applies to bringing people back from conspiratorial beliefs as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The film is Behind the Curve. We've been speaking to Daniel Clark, and we will be linking to the film. Really encourage people to check it out. Daniel, really appreciate you talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me.